what are we talking in terms of the scale of the amount of plastic out there? Do we have some numbers? Is it easy to quantify the amount of plastic that's out there?
I mean, there are calculations which say that in the year 2050 you will have more plastic in the sea than fish or plants, and that's quite a lot. I mean, you're talking about 9 million tons of plastic coming every year into it, but you can't find it back. I mean, all these ideas to find it back, it's a fake, I would say.
All right. What are the effects of plastics pollution on the health and biodiversity? You're a biologist. On the health and biodiversity of the oceans, but also ultimately on us, on the coastal communities, and on the tourists.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the large plastic items. Monica just mentioned them. I think all of you have probably seen pictures of seals or seabirds or turtles entangled in plastic ropes, and you already mentioned the ghost nets. About 50% of all plastic ending up in the ocean is fishing gear, and it's not usable for humans anymore, but it's still trapping fish, and not only fish, it's trapping birds, it's trapping seals, it's trapping turtles, trapping whales. So this makes very very sad pictures, I'd say, and a lot of people think, oh, this is really, really bad if you see a turtle drowning or a whale drowning because they are entangled in fishing gear or any other type of plastic. But as you already said as well, is that these huge plastic items is one thing, and entanglement is one thing and one problem. The next problem is that animals actually ingest plastic, and something we should keep in mind is that the definition of plastic somehow is that this is a new entity, something that does not exist in nature. So it doesn't decompose or not readily decompose, and of course animals living in the ocean, they consider everything else that's floating around them as food, and this was a right assumption for millions of years. And for the last 50 years, this is, unfortunately, it's not the right assumption. The other problem is that we have microplastic or, small plastic items. And so plastic in the ocean actually affects all living creatures from shrimps to blue whales, I'll say.
And to humans.
Yeah, and then, of course, I mean, about more than 1 billion people depend on ocean, on ecosystem services, including the production of fish, for example. More than 1 billion people depend on oceans as one of their main source of food, for example. So eventually all this plastic ends up in our, it's already in the food chain, and it eventually ends up in our stomachs maybe as well. The problem with these small plastic items is that they soak up and absorb all kinds of pollutions. They are so they are like chemical bombs. It's and they are poisonous, of course. They might create cancer in humans. We know very little about this. If I'd ask you if you'd like to eat up your plastic cup after you drank your coffee, you probably wouldn't like to do this, even though we don't really know if it's dangerous for humans or not. I rather don't eat my plastic straw or plastic cup.
You did the math. 6 pieces of plastic per breakfast per person, 146 double rooms, 80% occupancy, 12 months operation, and you have a grand total of more than 500,000 individual pieces of plastic for one hotel a year. And I couldn't help it. I have put my own photos of travel I've done this past summer. This is on the Canadian West Coast. I confronted the general manager with this, and they told me it was brand standard. So why are we so addicted? What's going on?
Okay, it's interesting because that page on our website is actually what started Travel Without Plastic in the beginning, because it was a trip to the USA and the Cayman Islands, and there was no other option in the breakfast room other than to eat out of single-use plastic or styrofoam. And at that point, I sat down and I just watched the average number of cutlery and plates and cups that people would take, and it looked around 6. People would take a bowl, a plate, a coffee cup, a knife, a spoon, a fork. So there are 6 items. And the restaurant itself was probably about twice as big as this stage. even though there were 146 rooms in the hotel, and those rooms could each accommodate 4 people based on 2 adults and 2 children. So one of the issues the hotel, or the explanation that the hotel had for me at that point, was they didn't have enough space if everybody came down for breakfast together. So they wanted people to be able to take that breakfast away with them and take it back to their room and consume it, because there would just physically not be the space for people to fit in. The other reason that they gave was the back of house equipment. There was not enough of that. They were not prepared to be able to wash and deal with the amount of reusable or ceramic cups or metal crockery that 146 rooms full of guests would get through. And then also the hygiene option. So when something is taken away and it's used once, health and safety is paramount in many hotels. Nobody wants to find themselves with a legal case or an upset stomach where a customer may claim for that and have tried to take money from the hotel. So single uses often become an answer to health and safety problems, and we've got to change. The industry has conditioned people to expect this at the moment, and we can equally condition them out of it again. So we need to look at the communications and having the alternatives.
Is the typical
available.
example those little plastic shampoo and plastic where really it was a push of the hotel industry to provide that convenience, and everyone decided to take them back home, and now it's very hard to change that consumer behavior, it seems.
It's one of those things, it's almost a souvenir, but most people, they don't use them. We did an exercise in 2011, a long time ago, not that long ago, but before plastic was as on the agenda as it is now. And we asked a hotel in the Balearic Islands to take all of those miniatures out of the bathroom, but to put a really nice communication in the bathroom that said, "Dear guests, if you need a shampoo, a conditioner, a body wash, please come to reception. They're available free of charge." And so this was a package holiday hotel. Most people are going for 7 or 14 nights. If you're like me and you want to know what your shampoo is doing to your hair, you take your own with you anyway. And not one person over the course of an entire 6-month season went to reception to ask. So that was, I think it was about 20,000 miniature bottles that weren't used that summer, and about €5,000 that were saved because of it. But there were 20 hotels in that chain. So suddenly the numbers start to add up, and the financial savings add up. So it starts to make business sense in some ways, but it shows we don't need them if we can communicate to the guests. We're not taking this away because we're being cheap. We're not taking it away because we don't want to provide it to you. You probably don't need it, but we're making it available with not a big fuss. Don't make a big fuss if they go to reception to get them, give them if they want them. But, let's change that, the expectation that it's going to be there in the first place.
There's 3 pillars to this potentially in order to deal with the problem of plastic. There's the communication to the customers. There's this self-regulation, we could say that, from the operators wanting, maybe via social pressure, and we've seen this with the straws this past summer, etc. So that's one of the pillars. You've got communication. And then there's perhaps a third one, which I'd like to turn to you, Monica, which is regulation, legislation. So what role? We've seen countries banning plastic bags, putting levy on some of the plastic. Is this one way to go, or how do you see this?
Actually, there are lots of countries who have already started prohibiting, like Rwanda and other countries, Kenya, I think, as well. And the EU has now started also to prohibit single-use plastics, like straws and ear cleaners and stuff like that, which is so easy to replace. I mean, you don't need this. It's very easy to replace. So regulation is probably one thing to change the production and the offer quite quickly, because it's so easy. I thought it was very crazy when I talked to the industry on microplastics in cosmetics, that they told me they need 5 years to change. But does anybody remember 20 years that you had microplastic in your cosmetics? No, you never had. It's only there for probably now 10 years or so. Why do they need 5 years to remove it again? I mean, it should be so easy to remove it. So you could easily prohibit microplastic in cosmetics, very easily. And that are the things where you can easily prohibit something, and I'm happy that the EU has started that, but they're not getting at the source of everything. That's what I told you about. That's why it's interesting for tourists. The tourist industry is, for instance, napkins. Nobody knows that the wet stabilizer in that is plastic. The people think if you have a paper napkin, it's not a problem, you know, and it can be thrown or it can fly away if you are outside and so on. So that has to be changed in a way that it has probably be regulated, or the industry has to say, okay, we change it now to a wet stabilizer which is not harmful, which is not plastic, which is biodegradable, which is cellulose or whatever. It's possible. It's not impossible, you know, it's not difficult, but you have to do it. Yeah. Therefore, regulation might be a good case to do that.
I've just seen a survey this morning that 49% of hotel companies are banning or trying to ban straws. So is that just the tip of the iceberg, and is regulation playing a role, or is it just from public pressure after photos of turtles and so on?
I think definitely the images around the turtle with the straw being pulled from its nose were a game changer for a lot of people. It's interesting, we often see headlines in whether it's in newspapers or in social media that say hotels are banning single-use plastics. I think, oh, who's doing this? And I read the story and it's, oh, they're banning straws. They're not banning single-use plastics or removing all single-use plastics. Some hotels are going a lot further than that. I don't know if any of you have seen the Iberostar stand here. I can't remember for the life of me what hall it's in, because the geography of ITB confuses me quite a lot, but their whole entire stand, even their tables, have got messages around responsible tourism, and they've got a display there of the different types of alternatives that they're using for toiletries, etc. There's still some single-use items in there that maybe they don't need to be in there no matter what they're made of. So we don't always have to swap single-use for single-use or replace it. There are options for eliminating that. I used to get, until recently, a little bit disappointed to read that people were only doing straws. But when you travel a lot and you actually see how many people haven't even started, then I think, yes, it is a tip of an iceberg. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's something that's quite easy to change. But again, you still need to look at what those alternatives are.